Hello, I'm Adam,
And I'm Adrian.
and welcome to Cast from the Crypt. I think the reason we're talking about this movie is because you said pilgrims, and I think that's as deep as it is. And we're talking about the witch, or as I call it, the Vavitch. So,
Yes, the Vavitch. Happy November.
happy
Uh,
November! Turkey Day is coming up.
it's right around the corner. I so the reason we call it the Vavitch is because on the theatrical release poster and on some of the other promotional materials, the W in witch is spelled with two V's. Do you know why, Adam?
It's like an
That
old English
was
thing, right?
yeah. It's like something they did in the colonial
It's like
times in the
yield
pamphlets.
shoppy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
that's
don't know.
why I didn't think you would know. But
Well,
anyway,
yeah. Sorry, let me give you some thoughts, opening
give me
thoughts
some
on
thoughts.
this movie. So,
Okay.
one thing I just it really pains me to see is that this movie and other movies like it get no credit. And credit is certainly due. I think Robert Eggers also made The Lighthouse, which is so unsung. I That's one of my favorite movies. It's well done, and I also often compare Robert Eggers to Ari Aster because they're both new directors that came out with two horror movies that were absolutely just good movies. And the horror genre, as much as I hate to say it, has become kind of like a brand. It's a stigma. If your movie is a horror movie, it's gonna maybe hurt that movie. People don't give horror
Mm.
movies any recognition because it is often a very ostentatious kind of, the pageantry of this genre is very off-putting, and these movies that actually deserve recognition because they're well done, well written, well acted, they don't get the recognition they deserve because they're branded as a horror movie and they get put in the corner with the rest of them. And this movie,
Yeah.
I don't look at it as a horror movie. Look at it as a drama. Look at it as a good movie because that's what it is. This is a really good movie.
Yeah, it's really phenomenally acted. Everybody in this movie just brings their A game. This was the first thing I ever saw Anya Taylor-Joy in, and it's no surprise to me that she has had her career blossom in the way that she has because she, I believe, was 19 when she made this movie. And it's such a strong performance on from her that you of course also have Ralph Ineson or Einson. I think it's Ineson. He is most recently the Green Knight, which is another A24 film, but he did Harry Potter and has done various other things. I'm pretty sure he's been on the BBC. Um, there are some serious actors. There's also, you may have recognized her, Adam. I know you've seen this movie several times, just like I have. But the lady from Game of Thrones, I don't know her name. I don't know the actress's name, but she's also very talented.
Her name's
I feel kind of bad
Kate
that.
Dickey.
There you go. There you go. Thank you. Yeah, she deserves some recognition. There's three other younger child actors in this movie that are very talented as well. A great goat actor in this movie as well, Black Phillip, of course.
Oh, I love
um,
Black Phillip. Where's his Oscar?
I I love Black Phillip.
Kate
We'll
Dickey.
get into Black Phillip.
Sorry to interrupt, but Kate Dickey's also in
No.
Green Knight.
Mm,
So two actors from Green Knight in this movie.
yeah.
So if you like that movie,
Yeah, which I will say this, A24, just to comment on what you were saying about the horror genre and the stigma around horror movies, especially in the Academy, right? Um, Horror movies famously are like never nominated, no matter how good they are. I can think back all the way to, I don't know the exact year, 2017, 2018, when A Ghost Story came out, which I believe was a 24 film. This phenomenal, not really horror, but had elements of horror in it. Uh, Mostly just an introspective like drama, and then Lighthouse and this movie, The Witch, both Eggers films. that are just phenomenal movies. They get zero recognition, and of course, Hereditary being one of, I think, just the best movies I've ever seen, but also just being a stupendous horror movie, getting zero recognition. And I think that's part of the reason why A24 as a studio chooses these films. That's why serious directors like Ari Aster and Robert Eggers, uh, choose to work with A24, perhaps because, they're not doing what Blumhouse does, where they pump out, six Paranormal Activities that aren't good, or they pump out, all those Conjuring films. I think that's Blumhouse. I don't even know, right? There's 1,000 of these releases per year. But A24 consistently works with really talented directors who aren't just trying to make shocking spectacles, right? They're not doing Rob Zombie stuff. They're like actually making films that are really, really good. And The Witch is really, really, really good.
Yeah, A24 does have this reputation of like quality. I think one thing I have noticed about Robert Eggers is he and I believe his brother as well. Am I
Omelet
mistaken about
Beggars.
that? They the Omelet Boys?
The Omelet Boys. Joel Eggers, is that his name? Max Eggers? Something like that?
Maximum Eggers?
I know, I actually think his name is Max Eggers.
Yeah, okay. Well, Robert Eggers and his brother too, who wrote The Lighthouse. They have this dedication in all of their movies so far that they're really dedicated to historical accuracy. In a lot of what they do is try to emulate the language of the time period and location. And this movie, they speak like people would, like Puritans in colonial New England would speak. And I know they do a lot of research. I watched an interview with them about The Lighthouse. They've read multiple books written by people in the area at that time, people who worked in marinas, people who worked in lighthouses, to emulate that dialogue. And they went so far as to like literally from certain letters take dialogue and put it in the movie. And they do that here too. You can tell they really, Robert Eggers did the research to get it to sound like it, to get the look of the time. And I know he's currently working on a movie about Vikings, and I'm very excited about that. And I'm sure when it comes out, it will also be very of the time and might be hard to understand, but I'm excited for it. I'm excited for it. And I think this dedication, this historical accuracy is right off the bat kind of showing you that care is being put into this. They're trying to be a good movie. This isn't just some dumb horror movie, Salem Witch Trial, whatever. No, this is going to be a good movie. This is going to be historical fiction. I think that's a good genre to put it in. If we don't want to put it in the horror genre, lest it be stigmatized.
Right. But we should say this movie's pretty scary.
This movie is very frightening. Yeah.
It's shocking. It's really, really shocking. So the opening scene, we see this family being essentially told that they have to leave the town that they are from. And this is all done very quickly. We open with them almost in a courtroom. Nonetheless, they're being tried clearly, and they are basically banished from town. What's the exact thing that they banish them for?
That's a question I've asked many times, and I've rewatched this movie so many times by this point, and they don't really go into specifics as to why they're banished. Clearly, there is a big religious difference. He, at one point during the trial, says that, he's being accused of preaching the gospel, and that all he was doing was upholding his religion, and that's why he's on trial. And there's some sort of what he's believing and preaching is not jive with whatever religious sect these colonists want. I guess that's very witch trialsy. Is if I'm sure it's such a
Yeah.
like minuscule, minute, makes no difference reason.
Yeah, and William, the father who you were, of course, referring to, he is a prideful man, and they very quickly they build a cottage outside of this Puritan colony that they were banished from, uh, and they have chickens, they have several goats, they have a farm, right? They're trying to just continue living, but outside of the colony where they probably had a larger support system. And man, this set, it really, it's phenomenal, right? Uh, Again, we see this like within the first half hour of the movie, but they've built this very shanty log cabin, and they are completely isolated, this family. They are in the middle of this prairie surrounded by a wood, a large wooded area. It looks imposing.
It looks bewitched. Yeah, there's clearly just if I was to go hiking, I would choose a different place. Because there's some evil trees, no leaves, big and black. If you go in deep enough,
Yeah.
you find a door that leads you to Christmas World.
Yeah, it's really, really, as I said, imposing and just a beautiful backdrop. Uh I guess beautifully terrifying backdrop for the events that take place in this film. Just kind of genius framing here in the very beginning. Uh, and we see Thomason, who is played by Anya Taylor-Joy, again, maybe a half hour into this movie, perhaps not even that long. She's playing peekaboo with her little brother Samuel, who is just an infant. He's a baby. What were you
We
gonna
get
say?
a shot of like her face playing peekaboo, saying peekaboo, and then a shot of the baby reacting. So it's peekaboo reaction, and
And then the baby is gone. We get her point of view once again. The baby is not there, and then we get a long shot of those desolate, creepy woods,
yeah.
which would imply that, there's something afoot.
I love the way it's shot. It's we were watching the baby react to her, and then in the final peekaboo, she says peekaboo, and it lingers on her face as like the happy, oh, I'm playing with a baby, smile just disappears, and she looks confused and then concerned, and then we go back to where the baby would have been, but it's just some empty blankets. And I like that the baby had been reacting to her, and now for this final shot, we see her reacting to the fact that the baby's not there, to the horror dawning on her face. We don't know why she's horrified, and then we see that the baby is missing. Then, like you said, it pans up to the forest, and she starts screaming for her brother. She runs into the forest, and this is the first blow to this family and the biggest seed that is planted for their inevitable doom.
Yeah. And what is even more impactful about this scene is it's not followed up by, some investigation. The family is investigating, but we, the viewer, we immediately see what happens to this baby. Shortly after the baby is taken, there's a really long, uh, dark shot of what appears to be a witch's cave, like her dwelling. There's this very wrinkly old woman. She's completely nude, just stark naked. And they do imply that the baby is sacrificed. And it's actually a really chilling sequence. There's this violin laid over this entire sequence, and we just see this elderly naked woman hovering around this infant. There's a dagger. It's not graphic, shockingly, and yet it is spine tingling.
Yeah.
I remember first seeing this and just being truly horrified, in like 2015 when it first came out.
like you said, it's not graphic, but I think the implication is very graphic. And that is scarier than seeing it, definitely. And like you said, there's this single violin note crescendoing behind the entire thing. So it's like creating this tension musically, orally. Orally
Yeah.
is with an A, you know?
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
but
No, it's really unsettling. They do a great job. This and again, this is in the very beginning of the movie. You know exactly what's ahead of you.
and I think it sets up what we're dealing with because we know it's about witches. It's called The Witch, but witches have kind of been they've lost their teeth. They've really been affected by cinema. You know, we've got the Wicked Witch of the West is the first one that comes to mind, and every witch after they've been kind of goofy. They've kind of been made into a very kid-friendly, funny sort of character, but then they show the witches in this movie. They show the witch right off the bat. They show this child abduction, and they really do a good job painting the picture of like this witch is exactly what the Puritans feared. It's
Mm-hmm.
every piece of dark lore about a witch is this right here right now. It's just innately unholy and serving the devil. I think is that clearly like the witches in this movie are simply servants of the devil, and they're so much scarier than any other witch I've ever seen in any other movie.
Yeah. Yeah. It's God, I love the way that you put that. It is exactly what they feared. And it's so foreign to us, this sort of depiction of a witch. And yet you immediately recognize it, whether it's through maybe it's like our religious upbringings, maybe it's some little piece of pop culture from when we were kids. We don't associate witches with these old shambling like satanic people, but whenever we see her on screen in that first sequence where we're introduced to the witch, you recognize it and you fear it.
Yeah. This is a return to roots for the witches, for witches in
Exactly.
media, because what we have now and what we envision as a witch is very much removed from what a witch actually is. And this is like going back to that, going back to the lore.
Mm-hmm.
This is they will try to steal children and they live in huts in the woods. And that all sounds like Hansel and Gretel nonsense, and it's not really scary, but it really is scary. You know, these fairy tales
Yeah.
are scary and are supposed to be scary. And I think this movie shows that if any of that happened in real life, it would be terrifying. And here you get to see it.
It is very scary, and I think honestly, the fact I think it would scare just about anybody, and I think that's proved by the fact that it made us uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
You
that's
know?
a good summary. Now, as scary as they make the witches, or the witch singular, we don't see any other witches until the very end. But that being said, the witch is very scary, but the witch doesn't do everything. The witch only really affects the family a few times. The witch mainly has just caused tragedy and caused a reason to be afraid, a reason to be paranoid, and then the rest of the horror and the conflict is the family themselves falling apart and turning on each other. It was through their own actions that they kind of fell from grace. It was not just the witch that, you know, damned them.
Right. And that's taken straight from Arthur Miller's The Crucible. There's infighting that starts, and they immediately start turning on each other. Catherine, who is the mother, she is completely torn apart by her baby's abduction, which of course she is. And what's I think really, really fantastic about this film is that you, the viewer, are of course also torn apart by this. right? When they start to blame each other, when Catherine starts to suspect that Thomason is perhaps a witch, right? Or when Catherine also starts to be upset with William because he is the reason that they are no longer in the colony. You feel for her, though she takes it to extremes later. You do feel for her, and you feel for William, the father. You feel for the children. They do a great job of setting up these relationships early on. And of course, what's at stake from the very beginning is a child's life, a baby, right? So the stakes are high immediately. We didn't need a lot of exposition. We're in the thick of it, and yet we have a clear idea of the relationships here, and it's riveting stuff. Like for the entire 93-minute run, it's also very interesting insight as to what Puritans believed, because the reason that Catherine is so torn up, save for, of course, her baby might be dead. They also introduced this notion that the baby Samuel was not baptized, and Puritans believed that because the baby was not baptized, the baby will be burning in hell if it died.
And that's also sort of the evil of the witch is not only does the witch want these children for whatever dark reasons a witch would want children to eat them, to use their bodies and blood or whatever in evil incantations, but they also, more importantly, want your soul. They want to
Mm-hmm.
give the babies to their master Satan, and they want to corrupt you. Uh, so yeah, maybe the witch could get to the baby. Maybe the witch could take the baby's soul and body and life, but the witch
Mm-hmm.
cannot get to the family directly. And so the family kind of has to destroy itself for the work of the devil to really be done. And that
And
makes the movie that much more tragic. The real tragedy of the movie is that these characters, their family falls apart, they turn against each other, yet you still root for every one of the characters. You like all the characters. You don't want to see them turning away from God and being damned, becoming bewitched.
yeah, so we start to see them fight shortly after the baby is kidnapped, of course. William takes his son, Caleb, this is the eldest son, to hunt. And that's when Caleb starts to ask about his brother's soul, whether he will make it to heaven, because he, of course, did die unbaptized. There's a great interaction between the two. The relationship building here is very, very strong. Major props to Ralph Innocent for this scene, for this whole movie, really. But uh, during this, we get a personal scene in which William decides to tell Caleb that he traded some of his wife's prized possessions, specifically a silver cup that belonged to her father, for hunting supplies. Now, we, the viewer, of course, understand that he might have to do these things because, again, he doesn't have the support, the backing of the colony. He doesn't have the same access to resources that he would have if he were there. So we know that, yeah, of course, he might have to trade a silver cup, right, from time to time. But this sets into place a whole campaign by Catherine to blame Thomason for stealing this cup. And this is when she starts to blame her own daughter about maybe taking the baby and doing something nefarious with him. And unfortunately, Catherine ends up wanting to send Thomason away. And the children, including Thomason, all overhear that conversation that night after dinner, that they're thinking about sending Thomason away so that she can go work with another family somewhere else. Uh, so immediately, right, divisions are sowed.
Yes. It's important to note that Thomason is the age that children would be back in this time period where they would go off to be married. She's young, but she is the eldest child of the family. The second eldest is Caleb, who is, of course, a son. And the parents talk about how Thomason is coming into maturity and ought to go get married. But what they don't talk about is that Caleb is also coming into maturity and is clearly like getting the stirrings, we'll say, as children get. And there's a few scenes where they definitely imply that he's looking at his older sister in not so clean ways. But I don't think you can blame him for that. He's maybe 13 and he lives in a farm and literally doesn't see other human beings. He's very
Right, he's completely
confused.
isolated.
Yeah, he's completely isolated, sexually confused, and in this repressive, religious, hyper religious family and society. Like, of course, he's not going to talk about it. Of course, he's just going to kind of do what he will, feel what he will. And that also, though, is the venue the witch uses. That's the vein the witch taps into to bewitch him, corrupt him, and damn him.
Yeah. There are a few scenes in which Caleb is seen staring at his older sister, and it's not something that they do lightly in this film. You can tell Caleb is like tortured by his lust. And every time, as you can imagine, they show it, it makes you, the viewer, incredibly uncomfortable. You can see that he's incredibly uncomfortable. And his older sister loves him so much, and she does not know anything about how he's feeling. And that's a larger part of this film, is there are so many things that go unsaid between these family members. There's just a utter lack of communication. Not that I think that's something that he should communicate openly, but it speaks to a theme here. They really are secretive people. And that's what makes the finger pointing that ensues so much more dangerous, because they hold in so many things for so long. This comes up especially later on in the film when Catherine really gets into it with Thomason. But for now, I guess we can continue into the next victim of the witchery.
Yeah, sure. So the crops as well of this family's little farm have been failing. Winter is coming. The whole movie has a very bleak, dead look about it. The setting is wintry. It looks cold. It looks gray, overcast, and all the plants are dead. The corn is dead. And so William, the father, tells his son Caleb that if they cannot grow their own food, they must catch it. And so there's a few expeditions they take into the woods to go hunting. And there's the most evil rabbit you've ever seen that clearly is some sort of familiar agent, spirit of
so
evil.
sinister.
Yeah, it's the most sinister looking little rabbit, and it may, I don't know, the witch uses it, maybe is it in many different scenarios, but initially they are trying to hunt it, and it lures them into the woods, gets them lost basically. And Catherine, the mother, tells Caleb, I don't care what your father says, I don't want any of you going near the woods. She clearly has her reservations about the woods, and I think maybe that was the best advice she gave in the whole movie, but it was not heeded. Nor was it really practical. They definitely had to go in the woods. But this is where William tells his son that he's sold the cup. This is where they have a father-son thing. This is where they have this dialogue about, is Sam in hell because he's an unbaptized child? Because they live in they built the house themselves, they built the farm themselves. They just live in this tiny little cabin basically, and they kind of all sleep together, like within earshot, just around the room.
Pretty much, yeah.
And so the eldest children overhear their parents having a conversation about how they can't support themselves, they can't feed themselves, so it'll probably be best to send Thomasin away. She's finally old enough. They can
Oh yeah,
marry her off, and then that's one less mouth to feed. And Caleb, who loves his older sister very much and is also having these very confusing feelings, and he knows his family is starving, goes to set out at night into the forest with a gun to find some food secretively. And you take it from there.
this is when he and his sister get on horseback, and they do in fact spot a hare. It is the most terrifying rabbit. It's got these piercing eyes. I don't know if it's an effect that they used. I have no idea if they just really had a casting process in which they found the most striking rabbit I've ever seen. But nonetheless, uh, their dog, which is named Fowler, which I think is a beautiful name for a dog, starts to chase the rabbit. And Caleb, almost in a flurry, starts to go after his dog and the rabbit as well. But this is when the horse, unfortunately, gets spooked and knocks Thomasin off. She is now unconscious, and Caleb finds himself completely lost and stranded in this almost mystical wood. I guess we do have another victim that isn't human. Fowler, unfortunately, is found by Caleb, just completely torn apart. It's really gruesome and super unsettling. A boy finding his dog like that. But then shortly after, he finds the witch's den, which I think the implication is that it's the very same witch's den that his little brother was inside of. But a woman emerges, and she is very beautiful. They got a very conventionally attractive lady to do this. We, of course, know what Caleb's been struggling with for some time now, and he's immediately attracted to her, and she lures him close, grabs him, kisses him, and as she starts to embrace him, wrap her arms around him, and pull him in closer, you just start to see that she is incredibly old. The very same old witch that we saw at the beginning of this movie, and we get a cut, and that's Caleb's fate, unfortunately.
They had this image earlier of like an apple in the woods, and when the mother starts freaking out and is very upset that William has taken her son into the woods to go hunting, he covers for his dad and says he thought he saw an apple tree in the woods. That's why they had to go in. They were just searching for food. And, you know, the obvious connotations of an apple religiously need not be said. But Thomasin hears her dad yelling for her and Caleb, and she runs, she finds him. It's been a whole day, I believe, and he's been lost in the woods. That night, they're all in the cabin. A horrible storm has come. It's raining. It's just muck outside. For all they know, Caleb is still in the woods, in this rain, in this darkness, and they need to go get him out of there. Especially, you know, back in these days, being lost in the woods at night in the rain, that could very well be a death sentence. That's very
Yeah.
worrying. So William's ready to set out in the middle of the night to go looking for her brother. She promised to not tell her parents why they went out because she didn't want to get him in trouble. She made a promise to him. And her mother is just berating her. This is where her mother gets really suspicious, begins to get a little accusatory of Thomasin. She thinks somehow this is her fault. She's the eldest. You know, there's a lot of pressure on Thomasin already. There's tension on the family due to Sam's death. Now there's another missing child. So in the heated argument that follows, she keeps accusing Thomasin of stealing her father's silver cup, and this is where William finally lets the cat out of the bag and he says, I took your cup, I sold it, we needed traps, we needed food, we needed the money. And just after this scene, Thomason goes outside, and in the rain, leaning up against the ramshackle wooden pen that they've held their goats and livestock in, there is Caleb. He looks battered and beaten, like he's crawled back to them. He's completely naked in the cold and the rain. Thomason gets her parents to come help her take him in. They take him upstairs, and he's, of course, racked with illness and sickness and is freezing. And they take him upstairs, and I think there's a good day that they're just really concerned for his health. And then that afternoon, he finally wakes up out of his feverish stupor and begins yelling and screaming. And
the twins, like shortly after Thomason finds him and they do the whole setup with Caleb, laid up in the bed, the twins, who are the two younger children that have been in this movie this whole time that we haven't really talked about because they don't super become important or very visible until around this part of the movie. But this is when they start to like sing songs about Black Phillip. But of course, you just think they're being kids singing about a goat. Shortly after the kids are singing their little Black Phillip song, Thomason is milking the goats. She goes back to the pen where she found her brother. And the goat that she is milking can't produce any milk. Instead, it is just shooting out blood into the bucket. So now their crops are suffering. They don't have a lot of food, and they don't have milk either.
It's a very, I guess it's something I just didn't notice is how important milk is probably to these people.
Well, they don't, think about it. They don't have anything else. Milk is at least some sort of sustenance.
That's a good point. Well, in this situation, so these kids, as much pressure has been put on Caleb and especially Thomason by these parents, they really don't pay any mind to the younger twins. They're kind of mischievous kids, to say the very least. They don't listen to Thomason, who's often just kind of put in charge of taking care of them, watching over them. And she is significantly older than them. They really should listen to her, but they're very mischievous. Mary, the female of the twins, at one point just starts making jokes. She keeps saying, I be the witch of the wood. And, all of this is presented like children playing. They're just playing with the goat at the beginning. She's just pretending to be a witch at the beginning. It's very harmless. And when she's not listening to Thomason, at a certain point, Thomason says, I'm the witch of the wood. And I like to eat up children. And she's just trying to scare Mary into behaving, basically. And at this point in the movie, where Caleb is back and has clearly been bewitched in some horrible form or fashion, this is when this playful children making jokes about witches, playing with a goat, that's when, now that things have gotten serious, that doesn't look so innocent. And the kids start accusing each other of witchcraft. And already the mom's on edge. Already the mom clearly doesn't trust Thomason just innately. Now, as these accusations begin to fly, the trust this family has goes up in smoke so quickly. Right here in this scene, the father forces them all on their knees to pray, just to prove that they're at least Christian and willing for salvation. And the twins can't pray. They forget the words to the prayer, to the Lord's Prayer, and they look like they're sick. They're kind of holding their stomachs. They don't even get on the ground like they're supposed to. They don't kneel. So clearly these children who have not really been paid attention to this whole movie by the audience and especially by the family, now we know that like they probably should have been watched better. All of this tension has been building between the older members of the family, and the younger ones have been unattended and left to be tempted by the devil
Right.
and tainted. And here is when all of it comes to a head.
And I would say this is the climax of the movie because William is really just berating these two children. And shortly after they forget the Lord's Prayer, they become practically comatose, unresponsive. And they just start to like lie down straight. It's really, really concerning and as this whole scene comes to a head, Caleb wakes up and there is a faint glimmer of hope for the family. So yeah, Caleb he lets out maybe a gasp. Yeah, and you see his mother and Thomason and William, they all turn their attention toward him, of course, because maybe he's better, right? But then he begins to monologue about how much he loves God and how he wants to enter the kingdom of heaven. It's very long, very verbose, almost Shakespearean. And he so much credit to this child actor because he looks just completely overjoyed. Yeah, and his mother she's so happy. She's like, "Oh, my son Caleb, Caleb." And then he finishes his monologue and just looks blankly at the ceiling and falls back and he's dead.
Yeah, this might be my favorite scene. It's a great climax.
Yeah.
All this horror is happening, this bewitchment, I guess we'll say, this damnation. But just before he dies, he sits up and does this fantastic monologue. This
Yeah,
kid,
this
man, I'm
kid
so
rocks.
happy. What a great monologue it is. Just about how the Lord has blessed him. He is his savior. And in this horrible story of tragedy and evil, this is right at the peak of his own doom. He's sick, he's dying, he's hexed, vomiting apples. But just before he dies, just when he could have just died and went to hell, he gives this wonderful monologue about how the Lord has saved him, and then he dies. And I think that shows that the power of the witch is not spiritual, really. The devil cannot control their souls. I think this is evidence for me that Samuel did not go to hell because he was unbaptized. This is the Lord just before damnation occurred, just before they died and would have gone to hell for being lustful, being unbaptized, giving themselves to this witch. This is the evidence we have that the hand of God is at work and he has come in and saved the souls of these poor damned individuals. Yet in the moment, of course, it is tragedy. Their son has died. I think these people, their biggest folly is that everything is everybody else's fault. They think all they can be is virtuous, and they think they are virtuous. They're as virtuous as they possibly can be. And if something's going wrong, it can't be their fault. They are virtuous. It must be because their children have turned to wickedness and sin. It's because somebody else is not praising the Lord correctly. And their kids cannot be more virtuous than them. Caleb surely did not go to heaven. He was bewitched and surely went to hell. And it's this pridefulness that I think causes a lot of their downfall. And William realizes this later on. There's a monologue where he finally says, "It's my fault. Pride is my sin." He realizes that he should have recognized the fact that he is not perfect, just as everybody else is not perfect, and he should have trusted his family more.
No, yeah, it's a great monologue. Yeah, he comes to terms with the fact that it was his unwillingness to just admit that he was leaving, out of pride and not truly because of his religious beliefs that put them in this situation or, put them in most of this. Absolutely. This moment, this confession of his comes just after the death scene, Caleb's death scene, where he decides, you know what, the kids are the problem. He locks Thomason and the two twins in the goat pen behind the house, and he starts to interrogate them. Thomason says that she is not a witch. As he is nailing boards to the I guess we could call it the goat house. As he's nailing boards, she's telling him, "Dad, it's not me. Don't leave children. It's the kids." Right? She's turning on her own little siblings. But ultimately, William will not have it. He makes them sit out there overnight, and this is where we see that the twins do actually have conversations with their black billy goat named Black Phillip, the very same one that they would sing songs about earlier in the film. And the movie takes a shift here because this is where, though the whole thing is about witches, and there's the apple scene, and we see Caleb get witched by an old woman. I'd say this is where the movie really embraces its mysticism, and we really see it become more, oh my God, what's the word I'm looking for?
Occult.
More occult. Yes, thank you. This is when we really start to see it become more occult.
Yeah, I it's of course at the ending, so if things were gonna happen, they would have happened by now. And like I said earlier, the witch is kind of sparingly involved in the story. But I think that's by design. The witch knows this is how the devil gets into your heart, is by sowing dissent and paranoia amongst people who should love and trust each other. And this is where the witch can strike, because now William refuses to believe Thomason. And here, once again, he's betrayed the trust of his family. He doesn't trust his family, and he put them in a vulnerable position. Here, he's put them physically, literally out of the house and into a vulnerable position. He basically builds a cage. Says, "Come eat, witch."
Yeah.
Because he's not willing to believe that Thomason isn't the witch, he doesn't see that there is danger in putting the kids outside. And because of that night, they are visited, aren't they?
They are visited. Yep. The kids, the twins specifically, wake up hearing like a slurping sound. And there's just a very disturbing shot of an old naked woman drinking milk straight from the teat of the nanny goat. This is the goat that was, of course, seen earlier, only producing blood. As we see the twins' point of view, they're watching her drink from the goat. All of a sudden, she turns towards them and attacks them. And this is juxtaposed with Catherine, who is finally just going insane, or she's also witched herself. That's not clear. But she's inside of the house, and she has a vision of her son, Caleb, holding the baby, Samuel. And Caleb gives her Samuel, and she starts to breastfeed. But then we get a stark cut, and we see that it's actually a raven pecking at her chest. Some really, really dark, unsettling imagery in this sequence.
Like I said, this is the point where the witch, I feel like, makes her move. It really gets involved with the family and starts to attack/influence them. Catherine sees Caleb walk in holding Samuel. She's so energetic to see her two dead children alive and well again. And Caleb, of course, says, "Mother, I've brought a book for you." And she, of course, is so ecstatic, so suddenly happy, and at the end of a long string of just depression, tragedy, that she, of course, signs her name in the black book and gives away her soul, damns herself. That's one more victim, one more that the witch got a hold of. And yeah, the scene where she's just laughing as this raven eats her breast. It's so gruesome. It's so
Yeah,
gruesome.
it shows you to your core. Um, this movie, it's really interesting, right? Because the performances are so strong. I mean, it's such an actor's film. They really have a lot of fantastic dialogue to work with here. But it's also, in truth, just an incredible horror movie. The gore when it's there is it's scarring almost, right? Like the first time I saw this movie, it etched itself into my brain. Just how visceral and how um, even the implied violence beginning with the baby, uh, it just it doesn't rest well with you.
Yeah, and I think
You
it's not over the top. It's used sparingly, like you said, and it
mm-hmm.
makes it like that much more realistic, especially in the frontier that they live on. The smallest wound could be fatal, and to see, a raven eat a breast is like that's a death sentence. Every little thing makes a big impact, and little things they are not. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Um, so just after the Raven scene, William wakes up and the stable is in complete disarray. You see that several goats are disemboweled. Now he sees that the two children, the twins, are missing, and Thomason is laying on the floor with her hands covered in blood. Now, William already suspects that Thomason is a witch. He literally just moments before, the night before, talked about taking her to trial when they went back into town. I mean, if they would ever be allowed into town again. Um, but then, uh, now is it that he wakes her up? Does he wake her up when he sees this?
Yes, she
Yeah.
regains consciousness is more like it.
So Thomason wakes up. William is he starts to berate her once again, but this time much more violently, suspecting her for a witch. Especially now that the twins are gone and all of his goats are dead, he is left with truly nothing. Um, this is when Black Phillip, who is maybe my favorite part of this movie, uh, Black Phillip represents Satan, but Black Phillip has these massive, imposing horns at the top of his head. Uh, they're very very big for a billy goat, actually. And he drives one of them into William's gut. And William tries to pick up an axe to fight against Black Phillip, but Black Phillip rams him with his horns once again into a pile of wood that is by the house, and the wood blocks just like fall all over William, and he bleeds out right in front of Thomas.
Yes. Throughout the movie, William has been going to just cut timber, cut firewood, uh, as like a distraction. Anytime his family needs consoling, really, or needs something to be addressed, he goes outside and he just cuts wood instead. And now here he is, killed by a mountain of wood that he himself cut.
Yeah, the symbolism, because you're right, he would go out there when he was frustrated and just chop wood for hours, and and they show him doing this early in the morning, late at night, um, and then almost comedically knocked into a massive pile of wood that is almost as tall as the house at this point. Uh, and they just fall all over him. And yeah, he's dead. He's left for dead. And this is when Catherine comes out. And she, of course, has already signed over her soul. But she, especially in the state that she's in, just becomes incredibly violent. Uh, and she starts to grab at Thomasin, slapping her, I believe, in the face, and she starts blaming her for just about everything. Pun intended, scapegoating Thomasin for all of the things that have happened thus far. And she even goes as far to say that Thomasin was seducing her young brother, seducing her own father. Um, and this is what I was speaking to earlier, right? Things that have gone unsaid coming up now in the worst possible moments when this family should be, when this mother and her daughter should be finding each other and trying to stick together because they're all that they have left. These insecurities that Catherine have come out and lead her to trying to kill Thomasin.
Right. And this, you knew it's been building to this the whole movie. The most hostile person towards Thomasin has been her mother. Thomasin clearly has been disturbed by the fact that she seems to be hated by her mother. She can find no affection or love or favor in her eyes, as she says at one point. It's at this point, it's no surprising that her mother, in a fit of rage, physically attacks her. And that is how bad things have gotten. That's how much she hates her daughter, and how much dissent has been sown throughout this family. Their family is dead. They're all dead. It's these two. Yet she cannot recognize that Thompson is the only family she has left, and she's attacking the only person left. And how
Yeah.
traumatic for Thomasin. Thomasin is the character you empathize with the most throughout this movie, just because it's people accusing her, not trusting her, not loving her, no one being on her side. And all she wants is to be a good daughter, to love her family, to be a good Christian. And the society around her is literally trying to make that not happen, is telling her she's being a bad Christian, is telling her she's a bad daughter. And she is, at this point in the movie, forced into sin, forced into finally giving up. And that's when we get this very chilling ending.
Yeah, and I actually remember I've seen this movie. I think you and I have both probably seen this movie, what, over 3 or 4 times,
I've seen
five
this movie
times?
6 times.
Wow, yeah, fitting number. Um, I've seen this movie at least 4 times, I'd say. The first time I watched this movie, I actually hated the end. I don't know why. I don't know why. I saw it in high school, and at that time, I was not fond of because you and I weren't really close yet. But I don't know. I thought the ending was vague, and I guess that bothered me at the time. Now, dude, I love that about this ending. Um, we see Thomasin completely alone, the corpses of her family members, rather her mother and father, in the yard. She enters the very same stable that she was locked into earlier, and she goes to speak with Black Phillip, just as the twins were speaking with Black Phillip. And she asks him, "Can you speak? Is it true? Can you talk to me?"
Dost
And
thou
then we
not
hear,
recognize mine English tongue?
right, right. And then we hear Black Phillip's English tongue for the first time. It's this very sultry, like
Yeah.
this whisper, very ASMR.
Whispery, yeah. And that makes it so creepy. Like, that makes it that
It's
much creepier.
very, it's very creepy, but it's very alluring in a weird way. And it's genius, frankly. But that's when Black Phillip starts asking her, "Wouldst thou like the taste of butter? Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?" And what else does Thomasin have left? She has nothing. She has to give in, because otherwise, I mean, what is there for her? If she goes into town, she'll surely be hanged for this. Um, so just as she answers, we see Black Phillip materialize into what I presume is a man we really only see his boots, but they have like silver cuffs on them, and they're these very nice, regal looking black boots. Um, and the man, no longer just a goat, asks Thomason to take off her clothes and sign her name in the book. And he goes, "Can you see the book?" And she, of course, nods. She sees the book. She signs her name away. And she follows Black Phillip, once again a goat, into the forest completely naked. And we see there what appears to be a coven holding a Black Sabbath around a huge bonfire. This is when the witches begin to chant, they levitate, and Thomason, almost in complete catharsis, like pure bliss, starts to laugh and levitate. And boom, cut to black, the movie ends.
The ending makes me think of the name of the title, The Witch. We have a coven of witches. I think the witch affecting them throughout the movie is a singular witch, but we don't really know that. And I like to imagine the witch is referring to Thomason. This is the story of how she became a witch. The whole movie is spent with her family, the people she loves, telling her she is a witch, accusing her of being a witch, when she was not the witch the whole time. And at the end of the movie, I guess they treated her like she was a witch. They told her she was a witch enough that, yes, she became the witch.
She did. Yeah, she became the very thing that they feared so much. And what I think is so interesting about this movie, what I think Eggers did really well, is the very thing that they feared and detested so much. The thing that supposedly their society best equipped them to combat was the only thing that she could turn to at the very end, right? The one source of comfort. And really, for the first time, I think in this whole movie, we see her grinning and laughing in pure bliss as she is floating, up into the trees. Now, I'm not saying that like we should sacrifice children and become witches, but I'm saying that the commentary that this provides on just truly, let's be honest, like the evils of Puritan theocracy and the rigid sort of terrible life that you had to live in the 17th century, I think it's just great. I think it's really, really interesting. And I think it's so much deeper than the average horror.
Yeah, I think, going off your point, I think this movie shows that the way the devil has gotten to these people, gets to these hyper theocratic societies and communities, is through religion. The devil used their fanatical religious beliefs to get to them, to destroy their family, and to ultimately tempt them to sin and send them to hell. And that's final thoughts. That's my final thoughts.
I love it. We both clearly love this movie. I really respect Robert Eggers as a filmmaker, and I think that if you haven't seen this movie by now, you should. Just because it's also just an incredible movie. Disregard the horror genre. This movie's gotten a lot of pushback actually from conservative Christian organizations, which I think is honestly the point. And I think that
that's funny, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the point. I think that's incredibly ironic, and anybody that has a problem with the movie, I don't know, I'd call into question their belief system. Where did you watch this movie?
I absolutely bootlegged this movie. It was nowhere.
Oh, I wasn't even on Amazon Prime?
I think you can rent it, maybe.
Oh, okay.
It's like, it's sad because it was on Netflix forever, and now it's gone in the void.
I know. I will say, I certainly think this movie's worth the $3 price tag.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
To rent. But yeah, I'm glad we got to talk about this one. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I think it's a good movie as well. I think it's a good movie And a masterclass in just storytelling. Like it really tells a story without much. It's really minimalistic if you think about it. The whole setting is just a farm a family built. It's a simple a cabin, the woods, and a stable, and that's the whole set. Their clothes don't really change, and it's very well done. The parts they needed to spend money on, they really did. But the budget for this movie ended up being $4 million, which is a lot of money, yes, but like by big budget movie standards, that's really not that much.
Yeah, no, it's not. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure The Witch was like one of the first big projects that A24 embarked on.
Yes, yes, it was. It really got the A24 name out there. I feel like it kind of helped
Yeah,
the
I think
popularity.
it definitely did. Yeah, and now they're on to things like Uncut Gems, So they've completely transformed as a studio. But this movie's great. I think no matter how long ago they made it, it's just an incredible movie, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, happy Thanksgiving. Gobble gobble.
Indeed. Happy Thanksgiving, pilgrims, and all the things. Whatever people say.
How now, I think is what people say.
Oh, all right.
Okay.
Well, that.
Well, thank you for joining me, Adrian.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank everybody for listening to. Goodbye.